Hello everyone. I hope that everyone can hear me. My name is Kira Gunther. I work for Mission Analytics Group, and on behalf of the SPIL committee, we'll be presenting the draft goals and objectives for the State Plan for Independent Living. We'll be going through the goals and objectives. Hopefully many of you have seen them. The outline of the presentation is that first we'll give an overview of the goals, objectives, and the indicators. Then we'll talk a little bit about timeline. And then we'll talk about collaboration and stakeholder involvement. And then after we've gone through, we'll have several minutes left over for any questions, comments, feedback. So my team at Mission Analytics was contracted to manage the SPIL process. We've been working with a SPIL committee and subcommittee, and we've been collecting feedback. What we're currently working on is the State Plan for Independent Living that will cover the period 2014 to 2016. This will establish the focus of 7B funds during this period. And one of the purposes of this is to encourage the IL network to undertake new and innovative projects. So as an overview of where we're at right now, this is a preliminary draft of the SPIL goals, objectives, and indicators. Based on the feedback that you've been sending me through email and also things that you'll tell us today on the phone, we expect that we're going to be making changes to this document based on community feedback. And the guidelines that we used to create the goals, objectives, and indicators that you'll see in this presentation came from a workshop that was seen and approved by RSA. So the workshop guidelines that recommended that the first step is to decide what you want to achieve, to start thinking about your goals and objectives. Then once you've decided on your goals and objectives, then you think about specifically how will you measure it, what are your targets, what would you like to see in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And then finally, develop an action strategy. So thinking about the activities, who's responsible, and what resources are needed. So just to give a structure, again this came from an RSA approved workshop, and that's what we've been using to design the goals, objectives, and indicators. That your goals are your desired outcomes. We may not expect to complete a goal in 3 years, but we should be able to see progress. So in setting goals, we thought about creating goals that are attainable and realistic, and also thinking about not having too many.
Yeah.
Next we think of the objectives. Objectives are short-term outcomes. So when we think about objectives, we want to be able to complete an objective in 3 years. And again, we want to think about having a realistic set of objectives so that we could complete all of our objectives in the 3-year period. And finally, measurable indicators. And this is the data that we expect to collect to know whether we're successful with our objectives. So how we know that we've completed our objective in 3 years is the data that we've collected in our indicator. The vision and mission are more overarching ideas. We don't necessarily expect to see them completed in 3 years, but they're guiding principles. The vision that we currently have as a draft is to influence policy and access to service delivery for all individuals with disabilities in California. The mission is to create policy and systems change for independent living. So as I go through, I'm going to go through each of the goals, objectives, and then afterwards, if we have comments, we can go back and look at the goals and objectives in the presentation. And hopefully many of you have already seen the documents that have been distributed with this information. So goal 1, as a means to achieve lasting grassroots change, members of the IL network enhance their community organizing efforts. Objective 1 is that the Systems Change Network provides members of the IL network with technical assistance on community organizing topics. The indicator is that 100% of network entities that request it receive technical assistance on community organizing topics. Our second objective is that members of the IL network increase community engagement in events. We'll know this because our indicator will that members of the IL network will increase attendance at community events by 20% over the 2013 baseline numbers. So objective 3, through community organizing, members of the IL network will achieve policy wins. And by this we mean changes to local or regional policy on issues such as housing and employment that can be clearly attributed to community organizing. Our measurable indicator is that members of the IL network will achieve 2 documented policy wins that can be clearly linked to their community organizing efforts. And this is by showing that members of the community drove the process of achieving these wins, engaged decision makers, things like that. Goal 2, individuals currently residing in institutions transition successfully into community settings. Objective 1, funds awarded to the IL network through the Transition Fund support the movement of individuals from institutions into the community. The measurable indicator is that 80% of individuals who receive funds transition into the community and remain in the community for at least 1 year. Objective 2, individuals who transition out of nursing homes are assessed on their quality of life through the UCSF Quality of Life Survey. The measurable indicator is that 65% of individuals who transition will complete the survey. Goal 3, members of the IL network build internal capacity through entrepreneurial activities and partnerships with other networks and organizations. Objective 1, the IL network undertakes entrepreneurial ventures that sustain or grow their capacity to serve consumers. The measurable indicator is that 100% of IL network entities that receive 7B funds for an entrepreneurial venture create a business plan, and that 100% of IL network entities that receive 7B funds for an entrepreneurial venture begin operation of their venture. So objective 2 is that IL network entities partner with other networks and organizations to generate revenue for their programs. And the measurable indicator is that 100% of IL network entities that receive 7B funds for an entrepreneurial partnership execute a memorandum of understanding or other formal agreement with 1 or more partners. Goal 4, in order to build a more robust statewide system, the IL network will achieve greater long-term stability. Objective 1, a working group from the IL network identifies new outcome measures to be captured in client databases and pilots a standardized data collection system. The measurable indicator is that a working group produces a recommendations document about outcome measures, and the working group produces a recommendations document about data collection systems. Objective 2, IL network entities in need receive technical assistance from a contractor hired using 7B funds, and the measurable indicator is that 100% of IL network entities designated in need receive technical assistance. Objective 3, IL network entities in need develop a mentorship relationship with a successful entity in the IL network. The mentorship funds will be facilitated and monitored by a contractor hired using 7B funds. The measurable indicator is that 50% of IL network entities designated in need develop a mentorship relationship. The IL network entities are identified as in need if they're addressing organizational deficiencies in policies or processes that have been identified by Department of Rehabilitation, Rehabilitation Services Administration review teams, or by the organization's board of directors. Other notes that I'd like to ask in the discussion is ways that we can add another goal to address underserved populations in the SPIL. or other ways that we can address that. The special populations that we've designated through looking at a needs assessment and through community input have been youth, Asian Americans, deaf and hard of hearing, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex. And we're wondering how we can incorporate these groups and also how we can incorporate other underserved populations. So our timeline is that we're hoping to close feedback on goals and objectives, but partly that's also because we want to move into April to really be thinking about the detailed activities. We're going to be having a SPIL committee meeting where we'll be talking about all of the feedback we've gotten. And then at the end of April, on the 23rd and 24th, we're going to have an in-person meeting in Riverside. And we're hoping to spend that meeting focusing on refining activities and other phases of the SPIL. So the impact on Californians with disabilities, $2.3 million in 7B funds, distribution of AB 204, guidelines for fee-for-service, outreach to underserved, and then plans for future network changes, centers that close, new centers, or other. So we are having, in terms of collaboration and stakeholder involvement, we're having hearings. This is my email address, and I want to acknowledge that I have received feedback on some of these things, and we're collecting all of that feedback. You can also call the SILC's toll-free number, or you can provide feedback by mail. So what we're trying to do right now is get feedback from you. If you may have noticed there are some topics where people have already given us feedback. I know there are people on this webinar that have emailed me. Thank you. And what we're doing right now in the interest of fairness is we're keeping the current skills and objectives that we're presenting pretty much the same. And we're collecting all of the feedback that we're getting from everyone. And then when we close our feedback period, we're going to go back and try to do revisions. So if you've suggested changes and you haven't seen them, that may be part of the reason. So at this point, I'd love to turn it over and just hear any questions. We can go back to specific goals and objectives if you'd like to discuss those, or if you'd like to give us general feedback or suggestions.
Liz, hi, this is Alan Toy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I have a question with regard to this San Francisco survey. We have a very good one that is put out by Mathematica Policy Research that is a Money Policy Person and CMS survey. And it's really great, and we feel like we have no need to have an additional survey thrust upon us. Where does that come from and why? And you know, can we use our own survey to fulfill whatever obligations might need to be met in those goals?
So this is specifically regarding Goal 2 about individuals transitioning into the community, correct?
Yes, correct.
Liz, if you're on, are you able to speak to the UCSF survey and where that fits in?
So this is specifically about people who get funding from the 7B Transition Fund. And we're looking for some uniformity of data because we are trying to evaluate, the Transition Fund has been operating for several years, and we haven't really looked at it in terms of outcomes, successes, how we can repackage the success of the program and use it as an advocacy tool. The UCSF survey, we paid UCSF in this current state plan for independent living. We paid them for developing recommendations of how we could evaluate the program and how to look at the program more comprehensively. So, I think we could talk about using a survey other than the UCSF survey, but we would need to use the same survey. Everybody who used transition funds, 7B transition funds, to get someone out of an institution would need to use the same survey.
I'm kind of curious why, with this incredibly good and thorough CMS-approved survey the need to reinvent the wheel by having another contract with another university. It boggles my mind because we spend so much time throwing good money after unnecessary things that and coming up with new things, new and wonderful all the time. When this survey is fantastic and it's been passed muster through every possible channel, and it's a great survey, and it doesn't make sense to try to recreate it.
It's a survey developed by Money Follows the Person, CCP. So it has a lot of internal and external validity, and it's been approved by Medi-Cal, and it's not clear to me why we would ask our consumers to fill out an additional survey when we are already required to provide them a survey.
That was Cosette Case, my program administrator.
Because we're already required to provide them with quality of life. We do it at before they leave the institution. We do it at 11 months, and we do it at 22 months.
And we're taking feedback, and it's valuable to hear this because certainly not everybody who uses the 7B transition funds does what you do. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Be happy to send them.
Yeah, I would be very interested in seeing the survey if you'd be willing to share it.
Sure.
On the way.
Absolutely. Send it to you, Liz?
You can send it to Liz if you have her contact information. That would be great.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that speaking?
This is Kira.
Oh, hi, Kira. Sorry.
That's okay, but if you send it to Liz, that works too.
Okay, super. Thank you.
And am I correct in understanding that if for example, we decided instead of using the UCSF survey, we used your UCLA survey, is that something that any ILC or independent network entity could use?
Well, yeah, sure. Why not? And it's a very good and comprehensive survey, and as I said, it's required that we do this through Medi-Cal.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for the suggestion.
I also wanted, this is Alan again, it seems that, well, a couple of things. First of all, we used to have a huge emphasis on youth, right? And I don't know whether that's been given up on or what, but I wish I could see more of that back in here because, somehow I think the independent living centers need to find ways that are more either cooperating with unified school districts or doing something. There's a TAY, for example, which is Transition Age Youth Program with the Department of Mental Health Services in Los Angeles, and that seems to have been just completely passed over by all the independent living centers as far as I know. This one certainly did pass that over, and it's given over to places like Didi Her Mental Health Clinic and other clinics like that, and we haven't really engaged much in terms of actually finding really deep and comprehensive ways to create partnerships for teaching youth about non-medical based ways to transition into independent living. So that's one of my concerns. And the other is in terms of reaching out to, we used to have an emphasis, again, on groups, underserved groups. So for example, LGBT youth with disabilities, or just LGBT people with disabilities, although youth seem to be having some of the hardest transition times, both accepting who they are in terms of their sexual orientation, but also having a disability that might be something that's considered to be a doubly disabling condition, if you will, in society's eyes. So I'd really like to see naming organizations, I'm not oriented, but targeted groups like that, not sort of relegated to other, but I'd like the SPIL to say flat out, we want to make a concentrated effort to reach out to the LGBT community, for example. So that's something in terms of like the also served that I don't see as much in this transition plan as or state plan as I have in past plans.
Are you suggesting that we would add a separate goal, or are you seeing this fitting in under one of the goals that we already have?
I think maybe separate goal, and that would be sort of a diversity goal or age, ethnicity, orientation, et cetera, kind of maybe an objective that would reach out to underserved populations. And those still, in my mind, include youth, because we're having, we still are trying to figure out how do we, it's funny because Liz, if you remember back when I was on the Silk, we were trying to figure out how we would get the next generation involved in independent living stuff. I think we missed that generation. So now we're talking about their kids at this point, because it's been another 20 years. And I still am not seeing this great cavalcade of involvement by young people with disabilities on many levels in the day-to-day work of independent living centers. And so there are things where people get together in Sacramento once a year, and there are some youth-oriented things, but I just don't see that as being objectives that ILCs should have their eyes on all the time with their programming.
This is Norma Jean, and I don't feel that people should be classified out. That bothered me, the last paragraph there where you're talking about other future youth, because you're talking about special. And I don't think that we just never really accepted the word special. And I think that everyone should be included. I mean, everyone should be served. I mean, the goals have to be for everyone that needs our services that have disabilities, rather than saying any one group, because you're classifying people in or out, and that's really not what we're meant to do. So youth, I think, is a good idea, but it, again, depends on whether they have families or what, because I know we work with families with youth, and so where you've got a unit working, and so there's all kinds of ways to work with youth. But I think some of your targets are a little more higher than it should be, like people moving out in the community. As to 80% making it, or what? Because I think that's pretty high.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I don't know. I asked that same question of my staff, and they seem to indicate that so far we're doing at least that or better. But I do see that some of the people we're transitioning out are medically fragile, and so it would be beyond our capacities, really. I mean, you just can't say when somebody's going to have another episode or a bout of whatever it is that puts them in the hospital and then the nursing home in the first place come upon them. So it's a little difficult to quantitatively say, yes, this will be the goal. But on the other hand, it gets back to doing a better assessment of their capacities to live in the community in the first place, I think. And that might reduce the overall numbers, but make them more stable in terms of who actually is transitioned out.
So did your staff suggest changing the number or changing the indicator for Objective 1?
For my staff, no, but Norma, what about yours?
I thought that it should be not quite as much. We found that the majority of the people that we've helped get out have stayed out. In fact, we've had people out for a year and a half. But you also have so many people that are so fragile that want to get out, demand to get out, that you can work with, and you just don't know. So far, we've been really very lucky. I should say no, because we really worked hard to make sure of who we have come out. But I think as an overall with people doing this, that you may not find that ratio of 80% is going to hold. Mm-hmm. We've only had 2 people that have come out, but that had a problem, and they both, because they became significantly real ill after they'd gotten out, and that was the problem. They had to go back in the hospital. So one person died. So it was it's one of those things that you don't have much control over. But I do believe that most of the time I haven't had any problems. But when I looked at that number, I was kind of surprised.
Thank you. That's good feedback. Thank you.
Then in terms of the entrepreneurial stuff, I fully agree that we need to move into bigger and better ways to sustain IL in the face of all these shrinkages, especially when all of a sudden they'll throw a sequestration at us and catch us blindsided, and we'll be totally floundering to keep our staff paid. And so maybe some of those things might include, I don't know, I mean, looking at fee-for-service concepts through consulting, ADA consulting, through SSI and SSDI appeals, or veterans benefits appeals and things like that, so that I don't know if you want to name those, but it might be helpful to sort of throw out some specific entrepreneurial kinds of concepts with the plan, so that we get a better idea of where you're going with that, and it isn't just like, okay, let's have somebody come in and make baskets.
Are there any other thoughts about Goal 3, about members of the IL network build internal capacity through entrepreneurial activities and partnerships with other networks and organizations?
This is Bob. I have comments on some other things.
Sure.
When you're ready.
We're ready.
Okay. These are, first of all, of course, I've already sent in a couple of ideas, so as you said, I assume you already have those and are looking at them.
I do, thank you. Yes.
Okay. Just two technical questions or issues. I'll just give you both of them. One, under Goal 1, Objective 2, you talk about the 2013 baseline numbers. So I don't know if that's numbers you're already collecting right now. And under Goal 2, Objective 1, you have that the people would stay in the community for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people who are placed in the third year, you wouldn't be able to collect the 1 year data within this time frame. So I don't know how that would affect the statistics. That's all.
Yeah, that's good feedback. We'll take that back. Thank you. That's a good thing. Those are good things to think about.
And am I still on?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I couldn't remember whether I had it on mute or not. On the events, I'm assuming that you mean community organizing.
Are you talking about Objective 2? Membership of the IL network, increase community engagement in events?
Yes. Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'm saying when you're talking about events, community events, or engaged in events, this is what we normally do, but I mean, are you talking about something different, or members of the IL network increase attendance at community events by 20%? How do you know where that number is now? What number are you going by to increase it by 20%?
Right. Ed, are you there? Can you speak to this if you're available?
Yeah, this is Ed Keiko, also from Mission Analytics, a colleague of Kira's. We are assuming, and we're happy to hear feedback to the contrary, that members of the IL network have numbers currently that would allow them to be able to indicate or to demonstrate that they had increased their attendance by 20%. Are those numbers that you are collecting, or are those numbers that you are not collecting currently?
We do have events, but to increase them by 20%, if you're talking about having an event that you have once a year, I don't know how you're going to increase that by 20%. Well, we have other events that might be, but I think that the number of events are going to be an issue. I mean, if you're talking about number of people that we're attracting into membership, into networking, or into advisory groups or something like that, those aren't really events.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, there are a couple of concerns. One is that the percentage increase, 20% may be too ambitious. And the second concern is how you count events and what counts as an event. Is that an accurate rephrasing?
Event, and then so that we know whether there's a 20% increase, because I'm not sure what we're classifying as an event.
Right. Those are both good points. And the 20% value would be over the course of the life of the spill. So it wouldn't be year over year. We wouldn't be, if this stays as an objective, it wouldn't, or as an indicator in this case, it wouldn't be in a single year, but rather over the course of 3 years, which may be a more achievable measure. And I do think you raise a very good point about what counts as an event, because there are different kinds of events, and that is something that we will take back and give some more thoughts to. Because certainly, a given ILC or given a member of the IL network can have many different kinds of events over the course of a year, and it does matter what counts as an event, obviously. And it wouldn't make sense, it may not make sense to average across all of the events. It may make more sense, and again, we'll have to take this back and think about it, to think in terms of increasing attendance at particular kinds of events.
Ed, this is Liz. May I add something?
Yes.
Sure.
Usually we depend on the Systems Change Network staff that the 7B grant pays for to provide us with these numbers. So usually Ted Jackson or whoever's in his role aggregates these numbers and then provides the reports to Department of Rehabilitation and to us.
And Nancy Hall,
We're not,
right.
Are you talking about with CFILC, or are you talking about their staff?
He works for CFILC, and we pay him to work with all of the systems change advocates.
Can we look at Objective 4 for a moment, please?
Sure, and I also just wanted to point out in the comments box that Nancy Hall comments that she's collecting numbers and lots of stats on this. Nancy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add about that, but we can move on to Objective 4.
Objective 4, Goal 4 rather, Objective 1. That's what I meant. Did I say Objective 4? I'm sorry. Okay, so this captured in client databases and pilots a standardized data collection system. So that makes me a little worried about what that means exactly. Because does that mean we're going to eliminate CFAL and MyCIL and all that other stuff, or what does that mean exactly?
This is Kira. So one of the things that we actually, I should say, we have gotten feedback that we may not want to actually pilot a data collection system, but just look at what people are currently collecting and what data systems they're using. One of the themes that's come up in quarterly meetings in the past year is that if independent living centers are collecting data, or collecting really different pieces of data, there's not a lot of standard data collection. So one suggestion that's come up is having some working group look into the different data systems and different data collection instruments that people are using and produce some recommendations about whether there should be some standardized. I don't think that we have any intention of people necessarily moving all to the same system, but having a group take a closer look at what data is being collected in the interest of thinking about if there's some things that should be collected statewide. We're open to changing this if this is something that people are concerned about, of course.
This is Ed Keiko. Just to echo what Kira said, this does not represent a commitment to moving toward a centralized kind of data collection or substituting the data that people are already collecting with different kinds of data, but rather exploring the possibility of identifying and developing new outcomes measures, and then also exploring the possibility of standardized data collection systems. So it's really more of a an exploratory commitment than it is a commitment to moving toward a particular kind of system.
Can I ask what the goal of that is and how you see that playing out? Is this more money that's going to go to a research team or a school or something, or is this money that's going to go into the system? Because these kinds of things, if you want that information and data, you can get that from DOR. We give it to all of us give it to DOR, and they have their outcomes, and they have our data, and they have everything you would possibly need. We don't need to do an exploration of that. DOR does that every year. I guess what I'm saying is let's put the money into the system, into this site, into and this to me looks like it's going to be a bunch of money going to a research team.
Right. And in addition to things that might just trap us into something that we're not doing. I mean, what happens here is that we are kind of pushed to get money from other directions and to be able to expand what we're doing. And we have to identify with all those different relationships as to what we're collecting and not collecting. And so we collect everything and then use the information so that we can identify what people are going to be looking for, so that we can give them back the information. But I think that changes. That's going to be crowding us out of the responsibility out of the opportunity to go other places for funding. I just think it's kind of, to me, that looks like just a step to where we're talking about. It's just one step towards it.
I was going to say, thank you. That's very good feedback.
Any other thoughts in general or suggestions?
I think this is a very hard job, and I'm so happy that you're doing it.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, Lord, me too. I remember my time on the Silk, and this was one of the hardest times of the year, was coming up with this plan. So thank you for doing it. And I'm sorry if we seem to be a bit in the oppositionally defiant place, but that's our role now, is to help bring this around. So I'm not as quite in the same role as I was when I was on the Silk, but you have my complete empathy and support.
This is Jessie. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate your candor, and it is your role to be oppositional and defiant at this junction, and I appreciate it.
So this is Kira. We have a little more time if anyone has comments now. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that we're also collecting feedback by email. So after this, if you, for a few more days, or if you think of things that you want to change or suggestions, please feel free to send me an email, to call the toll-free line, or to send by mail. Just another opportunity after this call, you have a brainstorm that you want to pass on. And then, does anyone have any other thoughts or suggestions about any of the goals or objectives?
Well, I just, going back to my initial conversation with Liz, the question is, should we have a new goal or objective with regard to inclusion of underserved populations? And I'm sorry, I don't know, Norma, if you were speaking against or in favor of what I was saying. I didn't quite understand what your point was, but I honestly do think that unless you make it a goal or an objective, it's not going to happen. And so I would really strongly urge you to come up with whatever it takes to formalize some response and outcomes with regard to bringing in young people, LGBT, and other underserved populations.
I agreed with what you said. I just was worried that when you're talking about a group of people that are disabled and call them special or categorize them out as separate from what we do when we do those things. But if there's an emphasis on one category because there's not enough of it, then that falls under unmet needs and should be kind of listed as these 2 or 3 things we're looking for. So that way it gives people 2 or 3 things to look at based upon their community, because every community has different needs.
Yeah, and maybe underserved instead of special. I agree with that.
I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you. Any other suggestions or thoughts? Well, thank you, everyone, so much for your feedback. We appreciate it. As I said, this is Kira again. As I said, we are gathering all of your feedback. We're going to be talking to the, we have a subcommittee that's going to be looking at this. And then we also, in the middle of April on the 15th, are going to be talking to the SPIL committee. And then at the end of April, going to the SILT quarterly meeting in Riverside. And there we're hoping to focus on activities. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you everyone.